Greetings, everyone. This is Live Life Well TV host Robert Landau, and this is another episode of our weekly show here on this channel by the name of Top 10. You might be wondering why I'm kind of dressed this way. Well, basically for two reasons. One, many of you might already know that I was a cruise director around the world for close to 10 years. 300 ports of call on close to 400 cruises during those days. Now I'm happily landlocked, though. But the second reason why I'm dressed this way is because of the content of this particular episode. It is called Top 10 Cruise Ship Insider Secrets. Try to say that fast 5 times. And you know what? We're going to do just that when this episode begins in just a minute. So let's begin, but just before we do, we would like to acknowledge one website. It is loveexploring.com. So here are top 10 cruise ship insider secrets. You ready? Get your life vest on, because here we go. Number 10, in no particular order, actually, the ship won't wait if you're late. You might already know that, and some of you might have already had some experience in that. But here's why cruise ships won't wait for you if you're late. Say you're in a port of call like St. Thomas, and the ship is slated to leave at 3 p.m. to sail on to the next destination, so you arrive the next day as part of your cruise. Well, you will need to be back to the ship by 2:30 if you sail at 3, sometimes even earlier than 2:30. And every cruise ship, as far as I know, the staff, the crew, the captain does a really good job of saying, please be back by 2:30 or no later, because if it is later, you won't have a gangway to get back to the ship on. So passengers kind of fool themselves into thinking, well, I'm on the other side of the island shopping. I remember the ship, we're supposed to be back by 2:30, but you know what? It's not going to sail till 3. So I'm going to shop just a little more and be back no later than 3, because that's when the ship sails. Well, what some passengers fail to realize is it takes about 30 minutes to prepare the ship to sail. Think of it. You got to get all those lines that secure the ship to the pier up and back on the ship. You got to get the gangway out of there, this, that, the other thing. Lots of things need to be done in 30 minutes. So if you're not back by 2:30, the gangway is usually the first thing that is taken back on the ship at 2:30. So if the gangway isn't there, but the ship still looks like it's alongside the pier in St. Thomas, you think, oh, I can see the ship from here. It's fine. No, you can't. You may be able to see the ship, but you can't get back on the ship. The ship will sail without you. And maybe on your cruise or cruises, you've experienced other passengers being left on the pier. And you know what? It's not only passengers, it's also crew and cruise staff. And sometimes you can't help it. I mean, you'll leave to get back to the ship when you're on the other side of the island by 1:45, thinking you have 45 minutes to get back to the ship by 2:30, but you get stuck in some sort of a traffic jam, or the taxi has a flat, or this or that. It doesn't matter. The ship's going to sail at 3. The gangway's going to be up at 2. What happens to passengers who don't make it back in time and are standing on the pier as the ship is sailing away from it? They have to get themselves to the next port of call on their own steam, pardon the pun. That usually means either hiring a boat if the next stop is close, or flying to the next stop if it isn't. And you got to make a deal with the port agent to get to where you need to be. It can be very nightmarish, to say the least. So here's number 9. Crew food isn't always that great. Now, when I was a socializer as part of the crew staff, that's how I started so many years ago, working on cruise ships. Then I was promoted to assistant cruise director, did that for, I think it was close to 3 years, and then was promoted to cruise director. All those years, I actually ate in the passenger dining room, just in a certain section of it that was roped off for cruise staff. The crew, which happens to be your cabin staff, the bartender staff, the staff in the restaurant, the cleaning staff, the Chinese laundry staff, all of that crew and more actually has quite different accommodations, but certainly quite different food. It's called the crew mess. And most times the food is just that, a mess. Not very good, not very healthy, but you know what? That's what you put up with when you work on a cruise ship, because there are so many other benefits that you just sort of take that as one that isn't. Number 8, a toilet blockage can spell disaster. Yeah, I remember that well. Not because of my toilet, but because of other toilets on the ship. The plumbing system on most cruise ships can be at times somewhat, well, let's say temperamental, and absolutely nothing besides the specially designed paper should be put down a toilet on a cruise ship. Unfortunately, when there happens to be a blockage, it can lead to an entire section of the ship without functioning toilets. And in the worst cases, raw sewage leaking down corridors can happen, but usually in the crew areas. Another not so great advantage of being a crew member on a cruise ship, which brings us to number 7. Water on board is precious. It's certainly a precious commodity. If there's an issue, for example, with the water filtration system, or water starts to run low on board, you might actually get asked to avoid flushing your toilet or to stop taking showers. It's not something anyone can really police, so you probably won't get in trouble if you ignore the requests. But if you want to help conserve water when it needs to be conserved, you might have to put up with poor hygiene for just a short while. Also, on newer ships, and old actually, pipes can burst. I remember one time waking up, I had a passenger cabin as a cruise director on the deck where the purser's office was. And one time in the middle of the night, I heard this commotion outside in the corridor. So I opened the door crack and peeked out to see what was going on. And a pipe had burst further down on that floor, on that deck. And it was flooding everything on that deck. And it was coming towards my part of the hallway where my cabin was. It was a nightmare. You had crew with their pants rolled up to their knees, mopping up leaking water. All the carpets were soggy and yucky. It wasn't sewage. It was just some other pipe that had burst. And that happens from time to time. You and I know that that happens in houses from time to time. It also happens on cruise ships, no matter how new, old, or well that ship has been built. It ain't fun when it happens, and you have fans and all kinds of stuff drying the mess for a couple of days after it, if you're lucky enough to be able to stay in your cabin. Hopefully it wasn't flooded and the flooding was close to you. Here's number 6. Cruising isn't green. A book that was written by an author by the name of Ross Klein back in 2008 by the name of Paradise Lost at Sea, Rethinking Cruise Vacations, actually cited that the carbon footprint of a cruise liner, get this, is 3 times greater per head than a Boeing 747. A website by the name of surfrider.com reported that a ship with 3,000 passengers plus crew generates 1 million gallons of gray used water, 2,010 gallons of sewage, 100,000 gallons of toxic waste, and 50 tons of rubbish weekly. Yes, all of that weekly. Cruise lines usually have internal environmental programs. Some of them are excellent, but that doesn't mean that they are all friendly to the environment. Number 5, crew and or guest romances are out. Relationships between guests and crew members are strictly forbidden. This has a lot to do with potential lawsuits and historical instances of sexual harassment accusations against staff of major cruise lines. And let me tell you something, sexual harassment issues happen on cruise ships, unfortunately. Crew are expected to be professional at all times, even if they meet a guest in port. But that doesn't mean that it doesn't happen. However, if they get caught, they'll probably lose their job. But crew romances are in. But careful, crew always has to be discreet. I've worked many ships in my time in the cruise industry, and relationships happen, particularly between crew and crew. And some of them don't end when the ship contract ends and the ship goes into dry dock. Many of them continue. And to this day, I know many crew members. I'm thinking of a wonderful Greek cruise line that I used to cruise direct for by the name of Royal Cruise Line. They ended up merging with Norwegian Cruise Line, but Royal Cruise Line in its day was incredible. It was a Greek cruise line that catered mostly to American passengers, which had absolutely fabulous itineraries. And I'm thinking of one example of crew relationships where, what was she? She was a gift shop salesperson, and he was a wine steward in the restaurant. And she was from Belgium, he was from Greece, and they met on the Golden Odyssey with Royal Cruise Line and had a wonderful romance. And after their contracts were up, she moved to Greece and they were married. And to this day, they are so happy and have wonderful kids. So it does happen, sometimes forever. Number 4, there are prison cells on board, so watch your step. Crime on board ships is very rare, although I do worry about it now because at this time on planes, on airliners, passengers, some of them are absolutely out of control and have to be subdued. I hope that type of stuff doesn't make its way back to cruise ships. As of the date of this episode, the cruise industry is starting to get back on its feet again after many long months of not operating due to COVID. But we're going to see from now until the end of the year, a lot of cruise lines and cruise itineraries come back online. I hope passengers are orderly and respectful of their travel experience. And I wish passengers were more orderly and respectful of their airline travel experience. But get this, everyone, all cruise ships have a brig or holding cell to detain anyone caught breaking the law. There are no police on board, but there happens to be security staff that actually have police powers, and the captain happens to be the final authority until the ship docks. The next port of call determines the laws under which the offender will be prosecuted. So would-be criminals should think twice before causing trouble unless they're okay with languishing in a foreign prison for an extended period of time. One cruise line that I worked for many years that I love to this very day, the chief pursers on the ships in that line were involved in a scheme, kind of like money laundering in a way, where when our ships would arrive in a port of call and food would be delivered to the ship, what the cruise line paid for food-wise to be delivered was not the quality of food that ended up being delivered. And the chief pursers pocketed some of that difference. Well, somebody ratted one of the chief pursers to local authorities one time, and I was on board when that chief purser was handcuffed and escorted off the ship and thrown into prison. It was a horrible event, and I felt very sorry for him because he was a great man, but not so great if he was involved in behind-the-scenes goings-on. He was quite old at the time, and he and the other chief pursers of that cruise line stayed in that prison on that island. I don't know if it was for a year or two, and they almost died because of those prison conditions. So don't do the crime if you can't do the time. But you know what? Don't even bother in the first place. That's the best advice. Which brings us to number 2. People do go missing off of cruise ships while they are at sea. While the statistics for people missing overboard from ships are relatively low, solving the mystery behind their disappearance can be difficult because investigations are handled from where the ship is registered, not the missing person's home country. Also, if nobody witnesses the person going overboard, it is almost impossible to know where and how they fell and why. Falling off a ship accidentally is extremely unlikely, though it does happen. So in most cases, it's assumed to be intentional. I will give you an example of something that happened to me while I was cruise directing on a ship once. The casino manager had a failed romance with a staff member. I think she also worked in the casino. And he was so distraught that one night, in the middle of the night, he actually jumped overboard and committed suicide due to the loss of his girlfriend. Devastating. And as cruise staff and crew, we were always instructed to, if we saw somebody, and passengers were told this too, if we saw somebody during the day or night, but particularly during the day, go overboard for whatever reason, that we were to throw deck furniture over the ship in the direction of where they fell, because it takes a ship typically a mile to even be able to turn all the way around to go back to where that person fell. And most of the time you can't find them because by that time they're already submerged and that's it. But if you throw deck furniture overboard, it serves as a marker as to where the person fell, so there's a better chance of finding them. Finally, number 1, your crew and officers can protect you from pirates. Now, that may sound funny to you, but actually, particularly in my day on the cruise ships, there were actually pirates at sea, mostly in Asia. And actually, if you worked on a cargo ship in those waters, and South America too, you would find yourself being invaded by pirates in the middle of the night. They would somehow pull alongside the ship and hoist themselves up to the deck and take it over. There have been some really interesting events concerning that, and very few passenger ships were taken over as well. But fortunately, the pirates, usually 3 or 4 of them, were subdued and taken into custody in the next port of call. But it does happen, and it can happen. Not so much now, but certainly just up until a number of years ago. So I hope you found this cruise voyage rather interesting, and we look forward to seeing you on the next episode of Top 10 here on Live Life Well TV. This has been Robert Landau, Live Life Well TV host, thanking you for tuning in.